I am Brian Miller. I'm the controller for the Milligator plant here in Conyers, Georgia.
I'm Sean Kinney. I'm the sales manager of the Conyers plant.
I'm Darian Helton. I'm the training and development manager.
I'm Chris Browning. I'm the lead manufacturing manager.
And Bateman assistant controller.
Phil Walsh, analyst.
Amy Smith, warehouse controller.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. So, Jeff, you've got a group of people that you can get interactive with. You can ask them questions, and if you do ask them questions, I'll take them off mute. They can reply, and again, Brian, I'll be looking for you. If you're waving, I'll take you off mute so you guys can ask a question. So we'll make it a little interactive that way. I think it'll work out really good. Jeff, go ahead, and we can get started right now if you like.
Great. I'll be going through chapter 2 of the book. I started as a foundation to teach what I call the core skill of a lean leader, which is sometimes called problem solving, sometimes it's called leading continuous improvement. Sometimes we use A3 and we talk about A3 thinking. What I'd like to do is to cover kind of the fundamentals of what we mean by all these words. And I'll start with talking about another webinar that will be coming up in a few weeks. My colleague Mike Ballet writes it a different way than I do. He writes business novels. In fact, he's a closet novelist who's written novels that aren't very successful, but his lean novels are. Some of you know him from The Gold Mine. His latest book, which was actually built on my model in my books about lean leadership, is called Lead with Respect. And in that book, you'll be introduced to an IT department and a CEO and the struggles she goes through with a coach to, first of all, accept that she needs to learn something at her age and position, and then second, going through the coaching process from someone who turns out to be a very experienced coach. So you actually get to kind of live with the characters through the process of transforming to become a lean leader, and you get to see what a good coach looks like. And the underlying theme is, how do you lead with respect? So there'll be 4 sessions by Michael. I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, the model for improvement in Toyota's case, or what they call problem solving, is to always start with your purpose, be very clear on the purpose, and you're constantly being drilled by the sensei, by the mentor. What is the purpose of this activity? What are you trying to accomplish? Over and over and over again. And you always should have 2 purposes, one for the business and one for humanity, for people. From an organizational point of view, the business purpose could be cost, quality, delivery. From an organizational point of view, the people purpose could be serving customers, serving society. From a point of view of your process that you're trying to improve internally, you might have a business purpose of reducing inventory, and you might have a people purpose of developing people to be able to see and eliminate waste. So in every case, you're always thinking about, what are we trying to accomplish to improve people, to improve society, to improve the people who work for us, to improve our business partners. And then you define the ideal state. What would it look like if we were in heaven, if it was nirvana? And that's not necessarily a goal, because it's impossible, because we're not in heaven, but rather it's something we're striving for and gives us a sense of direction. We know we're moving in the right direction when we're headed in the direction of the ideal state. We have to set a target of some sort that sometimes is called a challenge, or a target, or an objective, or a goal. Sometimes it's set through the Hoshin-Conry system, but it gives you a clear target that says, here's where I'm trying to get to right now with this improvement process that's in the direction of the ideal state. And this can be defined both as a result and a condition. So the result might be lower cost or higher quality or on-time delivery, and the condition might be that we have achieved a leveled schedule, that we're building a leveled volume and mix every day. So the condition actually if you achieve it, should lead to the result you want. Next. And then you need to ground yourself, and this is real important in Toyota. Sometimes when we set a strategy, we then say, go off and do it. But in Toyota's case, they say, let's study the current condition. In fact, you would be studying the current condition anyway. They call it grasp the situation before you would set your target. And the current state is, where am I starting? You do that by going to the Gemba, by going and seeing, by looking at the data, and getting a very deep picture of where we are. And that gap then between where I am and where I want to be becomes the challenge. And then the way we achieve the challenge is step by step. The challenge is something beyond what we've ever done before, what we're doing now in our operation, and we don't know how to get there, so we need to find our way through exploration. And the way we do that is by setting intermediate targets, again results, and also target conditions, and we then can start to smooth out that process of improvement. Instead of trying to take one big jump and hit a home run, we're going to go for base hits, and we're going to define one base hit at a time. Get on base, and then when we take a swing, we're going to use the plan, do, check, act cycle. And we're going to say, what happened? I hit a foul ball. I missed the ball. What happened? What did I learn? So how can I correct the next swing so it's accurate? And that's the learning process of taking small steps through PDCA, which some people confuse as being a Toyota bias for only wanting to make small incremental improvements. But in reality, they want to hit home runs. They want to score runs, and they want to hit some home runs sometimes. But most often, they believe to do something like come up with a hydrogen-powered vehicle that will change the way we think about transportation. Their vision is that that hydrogen vehicles will replace gas and they'll be as ubiquitous as gas. They see that 20 to 30 years out. But they need to do something, so they put out a car that might sell 2,000 copies. And then they study that and they learn from it. So they're PDCAing by putting a new, very technologically advanced car out there which can revolutionize the world. So it doesn't have to be small. The creative tension between the target and the ideal state, as well as the target and the current state, is what drives innovation. I remember when Steve Jobs set up Skunk Works to develop the first Macintosh computer, and there were really lofty goals, and there was little tiny amounts of memory that you had to cram all the read-only memory graphics into, and that target led to this team of people doing amazing things that they never thought were possible. Anything great in the world has happened because of some creative tension between a challenge and where we are, and then starting to work our way toward that challenge and having some failures, but then having enough wins that it motivates you to continue. So I describe PDCA really as the driver of continuous improvement, and it's actually also the driver of lean leadership development. If you want to develop yourself as a leader, think about the ideal state for the type of leader you want to become. That includes values, includes what you believe in, what you think is important. Then how do you break that down into steps you can take, practical steps to achieve shorter term targets, to step by step develop yourself as the leader you want to become. And you'll never reach the ideal state, so it will be a lifelong journey. The process of plan, do, check, act is really the scientific process. In a laboratory, we would say the plan is understanding the literature, understanding what we know, understanding what we don't know and we need to know, and then setting up a hypothesis. If X, then Y. Then we're in a position where we have to design the experiment which will test that hypothesis. And then finally we get to run the experiment, which is the do, after all that work in the planning stage. when we run the experiment, we run it with the idea that it may disprove our hypothesis, or it may not support our hypothesis, to be more accurate. And when it doesn't support our hypothesis, then we don't throw away the experiment and start over. We might even write it up and publish it because we've learned something from this. We've learned something that we thought would work but doesn't. And in the check stage, we're discovering what worked and what didn't, what happened from the experiment. And then in the act stage, we're asking, what did we really learn from this? What actions will we take next? What will we standardize? What will we share with others? What is the logical next experiment to run, the next PDCA to run? So this is really the dynamic process, the dynamic thinking process and learning process that gets you from your current state to a desired future state.
So this is interesting because in order to go through this whole thing, Jeff, you were talking about so many companies just do. They never get to really doing PDCA. You need to have some learning at the end of it, that you tried something and it didn't work, or it did work, and what did you learn from it? And I think that's when you know you've gone through the PDCA and you're given a hint as to what to do next, right?
Yes, and I'll talk about Toyota Kata. I've talked about that before, but in the book we talk about Toyota Kata, and that's really to avoid some of the common mistakes that are made. One of them is that I don't even know why I'm running this experiment to begin with. And that happens, for example, when we see somebody use a lean tool. We see somebody who's lean, like Toyota, and we start to copy their tools. And they have Kanban, and they reduce inventory, so we'll have Kanban, we'll reduce inventory. They have andon, and problems get the attention of management very quickly because the line stops, so we'll put in an andon. That's really a case of really not clearly understanding the needs of your organization, your area at this time, and identifying what your biggest problem is. It may not be inventory. It may not be having lights go on every time there's a problem. So what Toyota does is they follow PDCA, and that leads them to some specific lean countermeasures that we call lean, and those are the countermeasures at the time we happen to see them, which they may be working on changing right now and we may be trying to copy. The second common mistake is jumping from problem to solution without understanding and analysis, and that comes from a natural tendency that was written about by Daniel Kahneman that he calls thinking fast. And then he talks about thinking slow, which is very analytical and reflective. And unfortunately, what he finds with all his cognitive science experiments is that people naturally, your brain naturally thinks fast. And it goes all the way back to primitive times where you see an animal and you take out your spear and you've got to throw the spear right away to where the animal is going to be. And if you take time to reflect and analyze, the animal's gone. And in some ways, our brain has not advanced beyond that, although we have the capability to advance beyond that.
Well, you know, when we think about what we're doing, it's interesting. I had one of my students get up and teach value stream mapping yesterday. And he says, if I thought about it, I wouldn't have done it, but I just did what came natural. So it almost seems like when we think about it, we go slow. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, unfortunately what you described there is that he thought about it after the fact. You know, after he did it, he thought back. Now the question is, next time he's in that situation, is he going to, again, do what basically following a habit. You know, we start with value stream mapping, and then once again say, whoops, I did it again. You know, or is he actually going to learn and change? And learning and changing, it turns out, is much harder than we think. I use the example of a book called Change or Die, where 90% of people who are told either change your lifestyle and eating habits or you've got 6 months to live or some period of time to live end up dying, even though they know they should change. So simply knowing we should change doesn't mean we will change. But you're right that that's a natural tendency. And then similar to that is I actually have a answer prior to exploration, the old expression, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If all you have is value stream mapping, then everything looks like an end-to-end process, and the solution is to map the process. If you're an expert on theory of constraints, you're going to go look for the constraint. So our tools that we use and have used successfully end up being often the answers to whatever the problem is. So we then define the problem to fit our answers. Toyota business practices is really, in a sense, the countermeasure to these natural human weaknesses within Toyota. In 2001, they came out with the Toyota Way, and it was the first time the philosophy of the Toyota Way had been written down. It was summarized as respect for people and continuous improvement. And then within a year or two, Toyota came out with Toyota business practices. They had been training on the Toyota Way, which were principles, and they concluded principles are not enough. What we really need is some concrete method to practice and put into action those principles. And surprisingly to some, perhaps, the answer to how you put the corporate principles for Toyota globally, as 150,000, 200,000 people, one of the largest companies in the world, the way you put the business model into practice is by teaching problem solving. So they call a 8-step problem solving method Toyota business practices, and what it really is a method to coach people on how to use PDCA. And you can see that the first 5 steps are all planning, and they follow a lot of similar types of problem solving processes, but you first have to clarify the problem, and that would include defining the ideal state. And they would teach that. Never simply jump to the problem without first asking what is the ideal state. And then they break down the problem and say, what is this big massive goal that we could set that would be changing the world? How do we break that down into a problem that's tractable, and we have a rationale for why it's really high priority and will allow us to meet our needs now as a business. Again, the Hoshin-Connery process comes into play to prioritize what the most important problems are. They set targets, they do root cause analysis, and they go through PDCA. And this is an example that I use in the book, but it's in a different, it may be in a different chapter than this one, but it was a really neat example because Gary Condis at the time was the head of North American manufacturing, and he also was a managing officer, which meant he went to the meetings in Japan, the board meetings in Japan, and one of the board members, who was the one who was the executive vice president for global quality, gave him the task of reducing North American warranty costs by 60%. At the time, Toyota's warranty costs were the best in the auto industry in North America, the lowest costs, and he's given a target of 60% improving from what seemed really good. They went through this whole process, and one of the things Gary knew, because he had been trained for decades inside Toyota, is that the place where the problem originally occurs, where it originates, may not be where we see it occur. So we see it at the dealership when somebody brings their car in for repair. And then if we go one step back, we see the factory making the car. And then a natural assumption might be we need to tweak the way we build or inspect in the factory. But he went, and that's what he controlled, were the factories. But he went beyond that, and when they looked more closely, they found that most of these problems, almost all of them, but the large majority of warranty problems really originate in product development. And because the way the product is designed, over time something wears in a strange way, or there's some strange interaction. If, for example, you put in the wrong type of brake fluid, and some type of rubber grommet gets distorted, and then you get leaks. And so a lot of these problems, particularly in the later years of the car, are things that are not anticipated in testing because they're not tested for, and they really are the way the car is designed. So now Gary has to think, how do I get the whole organization involved so that sales is giving the right information from what they learn in the dealerships to product development and manufacturing, and we begin to prioritize the problems and find their true root causes in North America even before they go to the engineer who might be sitting in Japan in a supplier or in many different places. So as they systematically work through this process, they did have 6 years to do it. You'll see from this chart they took 7 years, but they had 6 years to do it, which meant 10% a year. And they didn't do it in one step. They did a lot of PDCA. And in fact, what you see from this diagram is the targets are red, blue is the actual, and it ends when Gary left the company, when he retired, but it continued after that. And they reached the target of 60%. But you could see, for example, that in year 1, at the end of the year, warranty is back to where they started. So what it looks like is they made a lot of gains, and then they went backward and they couldn't sustain the gains. In reality, there were some specific events. There were a few problems that affected a lot of vehicles, and they're more, I guess, what Devin would call special causes rather than system causes. So they were in fact improving the system, but occasionally there would be a special cause that would cause a spike. And if you studied that, you would not react to that spike, and you just keep on focusing on continuous improvement, which is what they did. Again, they had the vision, they had the understanding of the problems to say, yeah, that's why that happened. We need to focus on the biggest problems, but all the problems that occurred, not just one isolated instance, and let's just keep going. And through doing that, they were able to ultimately achieve their goal. Again, it's not pretty, it's not linear, and it's PDCA, PDCA, PDCA. The A3 is really just a report, but Toyota calls it something more than that. They call it a story. This one is from manufacturing, and the story is that they were not meeting demand. This was not in Toyota, it was in a supplier, auto supplier, and my colleague Dave Meyer worked on this, and they weren't meeting demand. And then when you look at a balance chart, it becomes obvious why not. You could see the bottleneck, you could see that the work is not evenly distributed across processes, and then they went further and looked at the 4 M's, and they found a variety of causes, and then they experimented with a lot of countermeasures, and they end up balancing the work, eliminating some people or improving productivity, and actually not eliminating people, but moving those people to other places, but eliminating positions, and now they're meeting demand consistently. So you can see the correspondence, which is really important, between the results and the original problem, which you might lose if you had a 50-page report. By the time you get to the end, they get results, and you forget that that wasn't the problem they were working on. So the A3 gives you a nice snapshot picture of that story, but it's only a snapshot summary. The real story is all the work that goes into first defining the problem, grasping the situation, deciding you need to make a chart, a balance chart, making the balance chart, coming up with possible causes. Each of these boxes required a lot of data collection, thinking, analysis, and then the countermeasure part is a lot of experimentation. You can't see that on this report. So as a result, it has often led to confusion between making reports and the problem-solving improvement process.
So if you can't see it, this is like another artifact. I mean, somebody would say, here's a whiteboard. This is like a whiteboard. I mean, what's behind it is really what's the important part, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's an artifact, and it's another artifact to copy without understanding the purpose, unless you take the time to understand the purpose. So the problem is, in fact, that the purpose is really to, again, from a business point of view, to improve, to get results, and from a people point of view, to develop people. And the reason the A3 was developed is because it provided a simple summary that was useful to the coach who was coaching the people who are going through the problem-solving process. The coach would say, wait a second, let's not go to box 2 yet. It's still not clear what the problem is. and you need to go back and collect some more data and talk to more people, and you've only talked to manufacturing, you haven't talked to sales, you haven't investigated product development, you haven't investigated purchasing. Go back and do that before you, and then see if that affects the problem statement. So the coach would slow you down, would prevent that fast thinking.
And this could be like a 6-month process here that we're looking on one piece of paper.
It should be. In fact, you wouldn't use an A3 for something that's a daily problem-solving activity. You know, here's the problem, we're going to fix it. You'd use it when you have a gap between where you want to be and where you are, and it's going to take several months at least to close that gap. And then what we see at the end is the result. Now that probably was handwritten, and it would have been shown to a variety of people step by step, so you use the Nemawashi process to get buy-in and engagement of other people, and by the time the report's done, everybody knows what happened and all the struggles and all the pain in the last 3 months, but as an outside observer, we would not know that.
Okay, let me see if Brian's got a quick question. Brian, any questions on your end?
Yeah, I had a question regarding you talk about the 4 types of A3s. Regarding the problem-solving A3 type, as you go through the problem-solving process, do you keep all the previous information on the A3 and just add to it? Or is there whole new A3s?
Well, very often there's multiple A3s that come out of one big objective. Like, for example, if you looked at the warranty case that I mentioned, there could have been an A3 for every major problem that they identified in warranty. There's a problem with brake leakage in the Camry. That might lead to an A3. There's a problem with air noise in this Lexus model. That could lead to an A3. You could have an A3 for the overall process of how information flows from the dealer to the product development organization today and how we want to improve that. So you can think of A3s as nested. There could be a macro level 1-year process, and then there could be 50 A3s or 100 A3s that are smaller problems that specific individuals are working on. Again, the point of it is when you have a problem that's big enough where it's not obvious what the solution is, and you're going to have to do some exploration, collect some data, understand the root cause. You're going to have to go through the problem-solving process. This is a way of providing a summary of where you're at that you can share with others to get their reaction. That doesn't mean that you throw away all the data that's behind it. It just means that this is the summary that you could then talk about with other people. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, let's keep going, George. So the problem is that the A3 tool is simply a tool, and really the purpose of the tool is for the mentor, an experienced mentor who understands the desired pattern of thinking and acting to coach the student. And when it gets used in other organizations that don't have the coaches and don't understand the desired pattern of thinking and don't have a good way of judging, is this a good problem statement or not? Is it a good root cause analysis or not? If you don't have an experienced coach who can tell what you should be doing and can figure out how to guide you through questions, through nudges, toward a better way of thinking, then the A3 becomes a report. And that's when it becomes dead and static instead of a living process of learning.
I've got Brian back here, so go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I had just a quick question. Back to the A3, when you're actually establishing, the future state, the ideal state, like in Gary's case, you were talking about the warranty reduction. He was given that percentage. He was given that target. Is that typical? I mean, is the team really involved in setting the target typically?
It varies. It varies a lot, but when it comes to a big challenge like that, and particularly at Gary's level, at a high executive level, then it's not unusual to get the target handed to you. because somebody perceives a business need. And when Gary got that target, he did not debate it. He was now, one of the executive officers of Toyota. He was a leader. If this is something that the global head of quality thought was important, Gary was not going to question that. So that became the target. In that A3, I go back, because Gary had to go back and then say, what is our real purpose? And the real purpose is to improve customer satisfaction. And because when you bring in your car, it's annoying. Even if somebody else is paying for it, it takes time out of your day, and it also gives you a little less trust in the car. So really the goal was to get Toyota owners to trust their cars, think of this as reliable transportation, and avoid hassles. That became the definition of the purpose from Gary's point of view, and the 60% target was just kind of not arbitrary, but somewhat arbitrary as a target, a challenge, something to rally around, something to give you focus. That's the way Gary interpreted it, but because of his sophistication. Now, if you go down the organization and you're trying to teach somebody who wouldn't automatically have that understanding, you might want to take more time to discuss with them the target and get some back and forth. And that happens in the Hoshin-Connery process. Typically a target is given, for example, to a plant. There'll be a target for cost reduction that's allocated from the corporate office that's planning how to achieve the cost reduction that's been signed up for by North America. And then the plant manager might say, this is too aggressive for these reasons. And then there's a discussion, and Gary would sometimes, not often, but he would have to be the intermediary between the corporate function responsible for cost planning and the plant manager, who's just had 3 new products introduced, and there's been some turnover, and there's good reasons why this is not a good year to reach that aggressive a target. So in that case, there might be some discussion. But by and large, the targets are business needs. They're not nice to haves, they're business needs, and there's a good rationale behind them. And an officer of the company will say, yes, sir, and then your focus is on how do we do it? How do we get the right team together? What's the process we're going to use? Where are we going to focus our attention? Is it going to be in manufacturing in this case? Is it going to be in sales, manufacturing, purchasing, and engineering? So the targets are not, the challenges are in Toyota are more often top down than they are the result of consensus and a democratic process.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so the solution that Mike Rother came up with, Mike and was one of my students. We've worked together for decades. We've worked with John Shook, who worked with us at University of Michigan, and we all had come to the same conclusion through our various experiences, which is that people were using the tools incorrectly. They didn't understand the purpose, and they're missing the essence. That led John Shook to write a book called Managing to Learn, which talks about the A3, but talks about it as a learning and exploration process. And in that book, he has a really good coach who's teaching a young engineer who's doing an A3, and he's doing everything wrong. He's jumping to conclusions about where the problem is, what the solutions are, and the coach is slowing him down. And through the book, you learn how that student is learning from the coach. And the result is an A3 at the end that looks totally different than the original A3. What Mike started to think about and reflect on his experience was that often those super coaches don't exist in organizations. And the A3 itself doesn't provide enough structure to steer you in the right direction of practicing the right pattern of thinking. And he started thinking about how you learn any other type of skill, whether it's golf or guitar or dancing in these cases. And what you have in all these cases are structured routines for practicing, for learning the basics, for learning the fundamental skills. And in the martial arts, in Japanese, those are called kata. Each kata would be a structured routine. How do I move my feet for a waltz? What's the 1, 2, 3 process for a waltz? There's a kata for that. How do I hold my left hand on a guitar? And one of the things you need to do is to put your finger close to the piece of metal on the keyboard to get a good sound. If you put your finger in the middle between the pieces of metal, you don't get as good a sound, or it's more difficult to get a good sound. So there's knacks and tricks that you need to learn just with your left hand positioning. So you need to practice that to the point where you put your hand in the right place naturally without thinking. And there are a variety of different practice routines that you would use to keep through repetitively learning the right way to hold your left hand. Then you can start to work on your right hand, and then you can start working on chords. And each of the components are something you have to learn, practice, until they become a habit. So we're trying to really teach fundamentals so that these skills become natural. Now, if our natural tendency is to think fast and to jump from problem to solution, we're going to need to come up with practice routines which slow us down, which cause us to look at the reality, study it, record it, think about the problem, and do that enough times so that the new way of thinking essentially overwrites the old way of thinking. And it's actually more difficult to overwrite an existing pattern than it is to write something new on a fresh brain. But none of us have fresh brains. Our brains are...
So I've heard some numbers as to how much repetition, but I guess it depends on the task, and it depends also on if you make a mistake, you might have to start from scratch again. I mean, there's different techniques, right? Or
yeah, so my teacher usually for guitar, I learn classical guitar, and my teacher usually says, do it 5 times right. If you make a mistake, do it 5 times in a row correctly. And I've heard other people say, do it 10 or 20 times in a row correctly. So that depends on your skill level and depends on the teacher. If I do it 5 times in a row correctly, then I'll have that new pattern in my brain for a few days. But then I might make the same mistakes, then I have to again do it 5 times for that, just that one measure of a long piece. So the important thing is that you don't play through mistakes. Because when you make a mistake and then you do it again, now you've reinforced that mistake and that's become your habit. So it's very important when you're practicing an improvement process that someone notices your mistake, because we often don't notice ourselves our mistakes. And I've been through the frustration of learning a piece and I'm actually playing the wrong note at some point. And I played it 50 times and it's just absolutely natural to play that note. And my teacher didn't notice it at first. And then he notices I'm playing a natural note G and I should be playing a sharp. And that just drives me nuts because it's really hard to change that pattern.
Yeah, it's almost like beware of what you do 5 times in a row.
Exactly. Exactly. I've done that, and I've done that 100 times in a row.
Yeah.
So all of us have, who are managers, who have been around organizations for a while, have improved things, have solved problems thousands of times. So we have very clear patterns. And usually the pattern is see a problem, fix a problem, see a problem, fix a problem. It's not plan, do, check, act. So the improvement kata model that Mike came up with is really similar to the Toyota business practices or any problem-solving process. It's actually a little bit simplified. It's 4 steps instead of 8 steps, but mostly it's planning and then it's executing. The planning starts with understanding the direction or challenge, so we call that defining the problem. And you have to then clearly state the challenge. And the challenge, what Mike's learned from experience, should be 1 to 3 years out. Then you need to grasp the current condition, and there Mike has developed a whole set of kata for what you measure and how. It's in the kata handbook that he's been developing for years. And you study the current condition, you have to observe a lot, not just look at data, but you also collect data and you analyze the data and you create graphs and charts, and you try to really understand what's going on now and what is the problem. Then, based on that grounding of understanding where you're trying to go and where you are deeply, again, that's slow thinking, it's sort of painful, then at that point, the good news is you don't have to come up with a home run that's going to get you to the challenge. All you have to do is decide, what's my next target condition? What's the next change to the process that I want to make to achieve this better level? So right now we see a lot of variation from person to person in how they do the job. And my next target condition is that each person is following the same process in a consistent way. And the recommendation for that time length is 2 to 6 weeks. That whatever you decide, if you decide, for example, my next target condition is consistency in doing the task, we just stabilize it with standard work. I'm going to do that in 3 weeks, and on this date I will have standard work, and these 4 people who do this job will all be following that standard work. And someone can come and see, the coach can come and see and check, either yes or no, I've reached the target condition or I haven't. I don't need to know what's beyond that. All I need to know is that target condition and the ultimate challenge that I've set for myself, or it's been set for me. Now once I know that next target condition, then I can go into a rapid iteration mode, a plan, do, check, act. And the executing is not just do, 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 do. The executing is smaller PDCA loops. So I write standard work, I show it to people, I find out that my English is terrible, or I find out that it's too complicated and there's 25 steps and I need to get it down to 8 steps. And you know, as you try and then show it to people and then test it, then your assumptions get challenged. And in each case, every time I try something, I'm looking for the gap between what I thought was going to happen and what did happen. And I'm not playing through my mistakes. So in fact, what the iterative process looks like recorded is, here's something I'm going to try. I tried it on this date. This is what I predicted would happen. This is what actually happened. This is what I learned. And you'll end up with many, many lines of PDCA cycles that are each looked at by the coach, together with the coach. And that's what's going to prevent you from playing through the mistakes. And in fact, what we're trying to teach is simply the scientific method and the same sort of pattern that people talk about as systems thinking, critical thinking, learning organization, all these kinds of skills that we talk about, preferred futuring, all these kinds of skills are often really a description of what we would like to achieve. We would like to be able to think about things as a system and then move toward that system instead of thinking in isolation. But what is the practice routine for systems thinking? And this improvement kata gives you the practice routine. Again, the coach and learner are going to do something every day. You may have just observed something. You're going to share it with a coach. You may have defined your next experiment. You're going to share that with a coach. You may have run the experiment and gotten some results. You're going to share that with a coach.
Isn't every day like one of the keys? You do it every day, so you build a routine. I mean, doing it once a week won't do it. I mean, I've tried, but don't you think it has to be every day?
It has to be every day. I know Mike's like a drill sergeant, and he's real strict. And people, literally, he has clients begging him, I can't do this on Wednesdays. Can we do, instead of 15 minutes on Wednesday, can we do 30 minutes on Thursday? No, you can't. Find 15 minutes on Wednesday. You know, Mike has no give in him. But you're right, once a week is not enough, because now you've got a week of accumulated bad habits that have to be changed. And you're not going to change a week of bad habits in one session on Friday. So this becomes a daily process that looks like this. what you have is the learner, and the learner is actually the leader of this improvement process. They're responsible for the whole improvement process. They would be the ones who would be circulating the A3 and writing it, and then they have a coach looking over their shoulder, and then we have a second coach here who is really the master, has the most experience, and the second coach is coaching the coach on how to coach the learner. In my leadership model with Gary Convis, we have self-development, and the learner is self-developing, and then the second step is developing others, and the coach is developing the learner. And then we have another level of developing others, which is the second coach developing the coach to develop others.
Now, that doesn't sound confusing, but you did say it well. It was you're developing a coach who can develop a learner who is a coach to another learner or something like that.
Well, eventually, yeah. So eventually, go show the next slide. This is what it ends up looking like. At the organizational level, you've got someone who's established a target condition, and for, say, a whole plant. And now you're the leader of one value stream. You might be the value stream manager, and then you're going to have a target that supports the target at the plant level for your value stream. Then you're going to be working with one portion of the value stream. It may be the final assembly through to shipping, and that is one loop, and there's a manager of that. And that person is going to set a target that supports your target at the value stream level. Then that person has one person who's doing one assembly job, which is the process level, and there's going to be a target for that one job, say to work to tact without defects, without rework. And so at each level, there's a learner who has a target aligned to the target of their boss, and their boss is coaching them, but is also a learner and has a coach. So it becomes nested and fractal. Everybody is a learner, everybody's a coach.
Okay, I'm going to draw in blue. I got a question for you. Is this person here the second coach over here?
Yes. No, that person at the organizational level is responsible for the overall plant, and actually is the coach then to the value stream manager. Yeah, the value stream manager is the coach to the owner of one part of that value stream, one department, say. Then the department manager is the owner and the coach to somebody responsible for one machine, one process. So this would be really Hoshin Connery in terms of developing people. This is how you achieve Hoshin Connery. So what we want from problem solving, whatever you called it, if you want to call it A3, if you want to call it 8D, if you want to call it DMAIC, Six Sigma, whatever you want to call it, it has to have these features, I would argue, or it's not effective. One is there has to be a very clear focus to the problem solving. What is our goal? That's on the way to the ideal state. We have to deeply understand the current state, and that includes observation at the Gemba, not simply statistics, but statistics are helpful as well. We then have to have an iterative process of testing hypotheses, and one hypothesis is this is the root cause. This is the root cause is actually a hypothesis, it's not a conclusion. And then we need to have some way of getting to continuous flow, so it's every day, not just before the milestone meeting. So you don't want to cram before the test and pull an all-nighter. You want to work and learn continuously. And it has to be fact-based, and it has to focus on developing people so that we're actually changing the way people think and act to fit the values of the company. So it's more than this problem being solved. It's these people being developed, and we're also achieving these results, the business purpose and the people purpose. So I would argue that if you're missing any of these things, it's not an effective problem-solving process. I would also argue that usually, in most cases, we are missing something. And in most of the ways that Lean is taught, it's almost guaranteed we'll miss something. We learn a tool like value stream mapping, and we just use that tool repeatedly. Or we learn that the way to understand the current state is only through statistics, and we're not going to the Gemba enough. Or we're jumping to what we think is the big conclusion to hit the home run, and we're not iterating, and we're not checking after each iteration, what did we learn? So anyway, this is a pretty disciplined, rigorous, ideal process, and you have to iterate on yourself to get closer and closer to the ideal state of following all these steps. And again, the improvement kata and the coaching kata are the best way I know of where someone actually broke this down to practice routines and broke this down to a way of teaching as rigorous as we would learn golf or we'd learn tennis or we'd learn to cook.
So here's what I got from TBP, Toyota Business Practices, and Toyota Kata. They're really synonymous to some degree, except the Toyota Kata breaks it down to practice routines versus Toyota Business Practices, which is, you know, the PDCA, but it doesn't describe the thought process that goes into the iterations, right?
Right. It isn't broken down to a fine enough level to have individual skills to practice, and it ends up leading people to jump to the next step before they're really ready.
Okay, let's. I think we got questions now. Hedia, if you're able to ask a question, I'll take you off mute. Let's see if you got a question in front of you. Go ahead, Hedia. Okay. We can't hear you, Hedia. I'm so sorry. Yeah, you're cut off now. You got to try next month. Yeah. Brian, go ahead. Yeah, she could text a question, and I'll start reading them off, Jeff, to you, because I got a ton here. But Brian, go ahead while I pick the next question.
Okay, one of the questions I had in the 60% reduction in warranty costs, he talks about breaking it down in the 10% per year over a 6-year period.
Right.
And even breaking that 10% down into monthly improvement targets.
Right.
Is there a danger that people, if the target gets so small, that people start thinking, I just need to work a little harder or do something a little bit different to hit that target?
Now, for each person, there's a significant challenge. So if you're in a plant sitting in Georgetown, Kentucky, and you're in a quality manager responsible for inspection, and you're told you may need to achieve 10% for the year, but you're still going to only impact less than 1% of total warranty for North America. So that's meaningless to you. What matters to you is I need to improve, and you might need to improve by 30% to get your portion. If you always want to keep in front of people, this is the yearly challenge, and what Toyota does is they have charts. It would be a trend chart, and on the trend chart, it would show where you want to be at the end of the year, and then where you are, and you might put monthly goals on there, but you'll always see the big target by the end of the year, and it's always very challenging. And then when you actually get into doing, and this is partly where the routine comes in, if you get into doing, so you're actually measuring and analyzing and testing and experimenting, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort. So you're not going to take it lightly if you do it right. If you blow it off and you don't have daily meetings and you say, oh, I can get to that, it's only 1%, I'll wait till the end of the month, then you're going to probably come up with a quick solution that might work okay, but it's not nearly as good as you get through continuous experimentation. That's where the coach comes in. The coach has to notice that you waited till the end. Now, if the coach doesn't, if the boss looks at the results and say, oh, okay, he got him, I don't know what happened this month. I don't know if he worked for 30 days or 1 day, but he got the results, good job, then that is a problem with coaching and it's a problem with leadership.
Okay, I had my next question is that there seems like there was a lot of Japanese words in Chapter 2, and sometimes I think that puts people off, and at the very least, it's kind of distracting. And in the book, you say that you would suggest memorizing a bunch of Japanese words, the underlying principles that are what is important.
Right. I suggest the underlying that understanding the principles is more important than the words that you use. So I agree. I think the kata is, in terms of the improvement kata, if you look at the words, none of them are Japanese, beyond the kata itself. So the words are things like understanding direction, understanding the current state. None of those are Japanese. But the reason kata was selected by Mike is because people in the martial arts who have had any acquaintance with it would know that word. That doesn't mean that most people would. So if you wanted to call it improvement routines, then that would be one way of translating it. If you want to call it improvement habits, that would be another way of translating it. So there's nothing wrong with using different language within your organization. But if you use those words, then you should understand the underlying philosophy. The idea of a kata is to break down the skills into elemental levels and then practice those skills repetitively until they become routines, until they become habits in your mind. Just like driving a car, you don't think about where the brake is. It's become a habit. So as long as you capture the essence of that and don't lose it, then the specific word you use is not so important.
Yeah, so Brian, when we first did the webinars, which turned into the course, which turned into the book, I asked the question, like, it's a good reason to know some Japanese words like nemawashi, because there's nothing, I think, in North America that we do that is like nemawashi other than, we call it get unanimous agreement or something. But what were you, does that answer your question, Brian? What was your question exactly?
Yeah, I mean, my question was going to be, why are there so many Japanese words in the book?
Yeah, why did you study Japanese management, Jeff? Why did you study the best of America?
Yeah, originally it was by chance that I was 30 years ago that I was part of a U.S.-Japan auto study, and I was getting paid to do it. And I was an assistant professor at the university, and I wanted to get publications, and I wanted to get summer funding. But then as I studied the comparison, I compared the Japanese auto companies and suppliers to American auto companies. I found very fundamental differences. And I found that they were doing a lot of what we were preaching, like they were learning from Duran and Deming, and they were learning from quality gurus and productivity specialists, but they were learning it the way it was supposed to be learned, and we were not. And then I started to understand culturally, America is very individualistic, we're very impatient, we tend to be short-term thinking. So if you wanted to pick a culture that was the best to imitate, I don't think it would be American culture.
Yeah, definitely the Greeks are right up there. I know what you're saying, Jeff. Okay, so I think I can buy Santorini Island for $2 now, a toonie, since I'm in Canada. Brian, any more questions?
The Greeks are coming back.
Brian.
Yeah, I was just wondering if Dr. Leiker had any insight into the issues that the Kata's having with your airbag.
With the what?
Oh, the airbags. Oh, the airbag issue, all I would say is that that's more likely to be a special cause than a systematic cause, because it was something about their particular chemicals that they used, which particularly in humidity would cause the explosion to be stronger than they intended, which then can cause shrapnel to come out. The bag kind of blows up, and so it's really too good a job of having a strong propellant, and it happens rarely. Out of millions of cases, it happens maybe in a couple hundred times over a 10-year period. So what happens is the company gets caught by surprise, and then sometimes they, instead of reacting immediately to tell the government, they want to investigate more. Maybe they don't want to admit they might have a problem, and then the problem surfaces, and then what could have been a small problem becomes a global crisis. And that's what happened with Takata and it's happened with other automakers, almost all the automakers. But that problem itself is not necessarily representative of the kinds of problems that you'd work on in warranty. That would be one specific problem, but because of the safety implications and because of the media attention, it becomes a major focus, and you look at every part of the company and question it because of that one problem. That's my point of view. I think that it's, just like, I think it's, from a rational point of view, you would not want to turn the company upside down just because of one specific, somewhat unique, rare problem. But that's the way we are, is that something becomes big and gets a lot of attention, and it's dramatic, and then that becomes a major focus, maybe out of proportion to the underlying problem.
Okay, I've done a couple things here. Number one, I've uploaded for everybody to download the PDF of this presentation. So you can download the PDF right now if you like. Number two, I've promoted a couple more people, and I think, Charles, you're in there if you want to turn your audio on. And I'll ask questions, and if the new panelists want to take themselves off mute, Peter DePorter in Belgium, Charles in China, go ahead, guys. Another question, Jeff, was on DMAIC. Explain the difference between DMAIC and PDCA.
Well, PDCA, again, is the underlying, say, the scientific theory of how we learn. So it's plan, do, check, act. DMAIC is one particular problem-solving process, just like Toyota business practices is one particular problem-solving process. Underlying DMAIC should be PDCA. Now, when I've analyzed it, you have define, measure, analyze, right? Define, measure, analyze, those are all plan, right? And like in other methods, you have 3 planning steps. Then you actually do something, improve something, or you implement something, and that's the do. And then control is a check and act. So the only thing that when I map it that concerns me is that control actually substitutes for check and act. And what that leads you to think is that by that point, when you've implemented something, because you've done such a good job of designing and of defining the problem and analyzing the problem, you have the one best solution, and you're really trying to hit a home run. And then you want to confirm that that works and then control it. Now, you of course can go back and loop back, but the process that I've seen people follow at DMAIC is often more of a one-time through cycle and not an iterative learning process.
Okay, so I like your baseball analogies. I don't know if you love baseball or not, but going up to bat and it's a PDCA, you want to hit a base run. So you're saying that with DMAIC, you have Babe Ruth at the bat all the time.
I think the pressure, the pressure on black belts as it's been organized by mostly Western companies is toward the home runs. Save $250,000, you got 3 months to do it. If you don't do it, your job's on the line. And you've got to hit the home run every time. So I think you're right. It fits our mentality of home run hitting, and not the base hit, learn from every mishit kind of iterative learning philosophy that is more common in Japanese companies.
Okay, let me ask Brian. Any more questions, Brian, before we move to others?
Anyone? No, we're good. Thanks.
Okay, Hedia, can you see if you got your audio working? If you don't, that's fine. Let's look at others. I'm just going to promote some people here, Jeff. It's going to take a minute. I'm not as fast as I used to. Actually, I think they changed the software, and it's not working. Oh, here we go. Now I'm getting calls. Come on, George, get me on the panelist list. Here we go. A lot of people are panelists now. Go ahead and take yourselves off mute and ask questions. Charles, are you there? Vicky Dulles, are you there? Vicky, I'm moving you up now. Here we go. Okay, we got quite a few people here as panelists. Okay. Jeff, I got one for you. Now, how do you propose regarding the Toyota business practices or the Toyota Kata? Which do you prefer when a company is starting off on problem solving? What do you prefer they post on walls or they communicate to their group to start problem solving? The Toyota Kata?
At this point, I would prefer the Toyota Kata because it's better suited to beginners, and it is very explicit in making you do the right thing. It's very explicit in how you understand the current state. It's very explicit in defining these shorter term target conditions. It's very explicit in daily iteration and daily coaching. Whereas Toyota business practices is much more macro. It's the big picture. And also Toyota's not sharing the training that they do. You're just seeing the model. So, and whereas Mike's sharing all the details. So I think from that point of view, it's more likely that you will learn a very good systematic method for improvement and practice the steps of it with the kata that's been designed for that. Whereas it's more easy to gloss over the steps when you follow a higher level problem solving process.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. We had some discussion on, where do you start, and I agree. Now, is the A3 process of recording it on an A3 or the A3 thinking equally important as the kata? Should they go hand in hand?
Well, the way the storyboard, if you look at it, we do show a storyboard in the book, or you can go on the website of Mike Rother, but the storyboard for the kata mirrors the improvement kata. So it's the direction, the challenge, the current state, your first target condition, and then what obstacles are between you and your target condition. Pick an obstacle and start PDCA cycles. So that mirrors the improvement process. You could put that on an A3. What Mike prefers is you put it on the wall. But if you go to Toyota, they don't do Toyota business practices on A3. They're doing it on the wall, on a whiteboard, or on flip charts, and then they will transfer it to the A3, often to summarize it. So the A3, you can also summarize the improvement kata on an A3. What you'll lose is you'll lose all the iterations, all the experiments.
So I'm finding with Jake Abraham, Dr. Jake Abraham, who's doing Toyota business practice training for us as the Lean Leadership Institute, there is a distinct difference between Toyota Kata and Toyota business practices. I think you need both, but I do think that it's almost like, which one do you do now is the question. And is it a very formal way or not so formal, using Toyota Kata?
The way Jake would teach it, coming from Toyota, he would be closer to Toyota Kata, because he would be emphasizing every step and getting it right before you move on to the next step, and clearly understanding the problem, really clearly understanding the root cause. Clearly, he would emphasize experimentation, a lot of PDCA. The one difference is that he would emphasize finding the root cause, whereas Mike found, particularly for beginners, there's a lot of wasted effort in trying to find the perfect root cause. If you identify obstacles, a set of obstacles, and then you start to work through those obstacles one by one through experimentation, you'll figure out that here's an obstacle, I overcame it, but we're still no closer to the target condition, so it must not have been a root cause. So you'll actually learn what's causing what, and you'll start to understand that through the practice of PDCA. And that then is a countermeasure mentally, psychologically, to the belief that I can find the one countermeasure through theory or through analysis. So in that sense, Mike said, let's just, for now, set aside the idea of root cause analysis, which to somebody raised in Toyota, that's like, oh my God, how could,
Well, that's it. I think you nailed it. Because, yeah, Dr. Jake Abraham will, of course, look at Toyota business practices like root cause analysis and problem solving in general. There is a root cause, and you got to find it. But there is an environment especially in the process industry, where that is way better than Toyota Kata per se.
Yeah, and that would also be true in a lot of engineering, where you can't even see the process that you're trying to improve. Now we've got mathematical models that basically can predict whether a car is going to pass a crash test before we ever crash anything into the wall. And it's got thousands of lines of code, and you can't see into it. So then we're trying to understand different parameters and the impacts those parameters have. And you can find the root cause even through the analysis method. So there's certainly more complex phenomena. But again, remember what the purpose of the improvement kata is. It's not to be the problem-solving process. It's to teach beginners. So
Okay,
what
I'm
would say
crystal
is-
clear now.
So Mike would
So
say,
I love what you're saying, because I've been struggling with this.
yeah, so Mike would say, don't pick the structural analysis of crash tests as the first thing you work on. Just like don't pick the Mozart sonata as the first piece you learn on the violin. Pick something simple. And what's simple is a repetitive process. And that allows you to learn, and then you can start to apply it to more complicated phenomena. And then at that point, you might use something like Toyota business practices. So I would say, if anything, you'd grow into something more complicated like DMAIC or Toyota business practices. And once you're grounded,
If you have a question, Hedia, now's a good time. You want to try yourself one more time? Take yourself
and we
off
should
mute.
cut out pretty soon, say in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
And if somebody writes down a question, I would take that.
Okay, last questions.
Yeah, Brian, this is Ruben Coronado with Laird Corporation in Piedras Negras, Mexico. And Dr. Lacker, thank you so much for the tutelage that you gave us today. My question was on the A3, and I'm so happy to hear that there are multiple A3s that can be done, because we're always being tasked with doing A3s in one day and giving it to the customer. So I'm glad to hear the multiple iterations on A3, and thank you so much for the tutelage today.
You're welcome. Yeah, the idea of the one-page A3, that was the 8D process. That was common in the 8D process that became popular in the auto industry. And that really was primarily for containment of a specific problem. You sent a bad part to the customer, and then they want you to immediately analyze that particular part and why it was bad, and they want that quick. They give you 24 hours, and they want you to come up with the problem and the countermeasure. Obviously, you're not going to do detailed study and analysis and observation when you only have 24 hours. You're going to come up with the most obvious cause and with a countermeasure to that to satisfy the customer. It may be enough. It may be very obvious that there was a problem with a setting on a machine, and what we have to do is to have some system so that it's very visible and we can't set the machine incorrectly without a red light coming on or something. So it may well be that the types of problems we're talking about really do have simple cause and effect that we can observe. That wouldn't be a good candidate for a 4-month project. It would be just do it. But then people think that that one-page report can always be used for one-day turnarounds, when that report was really for kind of a kind of firefighting rather than systematic improvement.
All right, any last, maybe one more question, and then everybody can come on, off mute and say goodbye and thank you, and then we'll call it a day. But thank you, Jeff. This was great. It helped me quite a bit, especially with baseball. Okay, any more questions, guys?
Okay, so why don't we call it a day? Again, I'll just remind you about Mike Ballet's sessions, which I'm sure will be great. That book is wonderful. It's something you could read like a novel. You could read it in bed at night, and it's a lot of fun. But his understanding is very deep, and he's really thought a lot about lead with respect. The Toyota way is continuous improvement and respect for people. We've thought a lot more about continuous improvement than we have respect for people. So that's what really drove Mike to start thinking more deeply about what respect means.
Yeah, I think what I'm going to do, and I hope I'm not taking liberties here, I'm going to invite everybody that came to this webinar to Mike's webinar, and this way, you know, they don't have to re-register. Okay? So whoever's listening to this, don't worry about it. I'll just add you to Michael Ballet's webinar. Just accept the invite for the next, you know, for these 4 sessions, next 4 months. And we'll see you in a month, Jeff. Thank you very much. I really appreciate everything.
Yeah, have a nice vacation, Thanksgiving, whatever you're celebrating in the next few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm celebrating 2 months away from Winnipeg, Canada, which will be cold. Okay, take care, Jeff. Bye.